The house was always filled with whispers that clung to the walls like smoke, heavy and suffocating. She lived beneath them, not in years but in spirit, weighed down by the constant comparisons and cruel glances of her stepmother and stepsister. Her stepmother's eyes were sharp, like shards of glass, constantly measuring her worth and finding her lacking, even when she had done nothing wrong. Her stepsister, spoiled and loud, seemed to exist only to remind her of what she was not: lavish, adorned, praised. The young girl, though quiet, possessed a beauty that was not painted on her face with powders or jewels but breathed through her very presence, in the softness of her voice, in the patience with which she bore the burdens handed to her. That beauty did not need to be seen to be felt, and this truth alone became a thorn in the flesh of those who shared her home. Her stepmother despised the way the neighbors' eyes sometimes lingered too long when the girl fetched water at the well. They would whisper about her grace, her gentleness, the glow in her face that came not from wealth but from an inner fire. Her stepsister fumed when suitors came to the door and, even without meaning to, let their gaze slide past her painted lips to rest on the quiet girl who stood humbly at the back. Each smile she received, each word of kindness spoken in her direction, became fuel for envy, and that envy curdled into hatred. They did not strike her openly. Instead, their cruelty seeped into the little corners of her life. Her food was always less seasoned, her clothes torn and never mended, her chores doubled when no one was watching. They left her out in the cold during family gatherings, made her clean the cups long after the laughter had died down, and whispered poisonous words so that she would hear them just at the edge of her sleep. Every night she went to bed with the taste of tears salted into her lips, though she dared not let them see her cry. For to cry would be to give them victory, and deep within her she carried a stubborn ember that refused to be snuffed out. Her stepsister strutted through the halls, silks rustling like the wings of a crow, her face painted bright to hide the bitterness underneath. She would stand before the girl and ask questions only meant to wound. Why does no one look at you when you speak? Why does mother say you have no grace? Why do you always wear rags while I wear jewels? The girl never answered, for she had learned silence was sharper than any reply. But her silence only deepened their rage, for it was as though she was untouchable, as though no matter how much mud they threw, her spirit remained unstained. The stepmother, too, grew restless. She had thought that time would wear down the girl's light, that years of harsh words would crack her open and reveal her weakness. But instead, the girl only grew stronger in ways unseen. Her quiet nature turned into resilience, her humility into a quiet pride. The more they tried to ruin her, the more she stood like a reed by the river, bending under storms but never breaking. And this unbrokenness, this strength they could not name, haunted the stepmother. In secret, the girl longed for warmth, for a word of kindness, for someone in that house to see her not as an enemy but as family. Yet she had learned to make do with her own company. She spoke to the stars outside her window, imagining they were guardians who listened when no one else would. She found comfort in the tasks they gave her, in the rhythm of sweeping floors, in the soft hum of grinding grain. Each act, though born from their cruelty, became a prayer for survival. Still, envy is a seed that grows wild when watered daily, and in that household, it sprouted into a forest of malice. The stepmother began to plot ways to strip the girl of her beauty entirely, to twist her fate so that no man, no neighbor, no stranger would ever speak her name with admiration again. The stepsister, no less cruel, wished not only for her downfall but for her complete ruin, so that she would crawl in the dust while others laughed. And so the girl lived each day under their shadows, unaware that their envy was no longer just bitterness, it was sharpening itself into action. The house was heavy with it, every glance and every silence charged with the promise that something darker was coming, something that would test the strength she had guarded all these years. For beauty, whether worn openly or hidden in the quiet heart of a girl, has always been both a blessing and a curse, and hers was about to draw fire greater than she had ever known. They gave her the heaviest burdens not because the tasks required her hands, but because cruelty had become their daily bread. From the break of dawn, she was sent to fetch water from the farthest stream, even when nearer wells were full. Her stepsister would toss garments into the mud just to order her to scrub them clean again, laughing as her knees bled on the stones. When visitors arrived, her stepmother would sit the girl in the corner, deliberately calling her out to perform menial tasks while mocking her as though she were nothing more than a servant. She was told she was unworthy of speaking at the table, her voice drowned beneath the cackling tones of those who delighted in her humiliation. Yet each insult only hardened her resolve, though she said nothing in return. Her silence was their frustration. They wanted her tears, but she gave them only quiet endurance. At night, when the household rested, she would sit by the dim light of the moon, her hands raw and her body weary, whispering prayers not for release but for strength to continue. And though her strength appeared small, it was the kind that the spirits often noticed, the kind that turned oppression into power unnoticed by those who thrived on cruelty. They believed they were breaking her, but in truth they were forging her into something far greater than themselves. Their taunts and laughter filled the air, yet beneath it all, the ground itself seemed to hold her grief, waiting for the day when it would answer back on her behalf. As the day of the Festival of Unity drew near, the whole village seemed to move with a rhythm of joy. Women wove garlands of bright flowers, men roasted meats over open fires, and children practiced dances in the dust-filled courtyards. The air was rich with the scents of roasted yam, smoked fish and sweet palm wine. Families took great pride in preparing their finest offerings, for this feast was more than food and music. It was a time when the entire community came together, reaffirming bonds of kinship and harmony. Every household contributed, and those who displayed abundance were admired and respected, for the festival was a chance to show not only generosity but also dignity. In the girl's home, however, the atmosphere was poisoned by envy and cruelty. Her stepmother and stepsister bustled with excitement, eager to flaunt their beauty and wealth before the village. They laid out their richest fabrics, jewelry that gleamed like captured sunlight, and a jar of wine they had been saving for months. The girl, however, was excluded from every preparation. Her stepmother looked her over with narrowed eyes and hissed, "You are not to show your face at the festival. You would only bring shame upon us. Stay hidden like the shadow you are." The stepsister laughed cruelly, adding, "Better still, scrub the floors while we dance. That is your festival." Though her heart tightened at their words, the girl remained silent. She spent the day cleaning and cooking under their watchful eyes, her fingers stained by the grinding of herbs and her back aching from carrying water. Each sound from outside, the beat of the drums, the burst of laughter, the chatter of voices, stabbed her with longing. She imagined the bright torches, the swirling dancers, the tables overflowing with food. She had never been allowed to join, never permitted to taste the sweetness of belonging. Yet the hunger in her heart was stronger than her fear of punishment. When evening came and her stepmother and stepsister departed, adorned in glowing fabrics and carrying their precious wine, the girl stood alone in the empty house. The silence pressed upon her, broken only by the distant pulse of drums. Her hands trembled as she wiped them on her plain dress. She knew what disobedience would cost her, but she could not bear another night locked away from joy. With a deep breath, she slipped out the back door, her bare feet soft against the earth. She followed the sound of celebration through winding paths lit by the flicker of torches. As she approached the village square, her eyes widened. The festival was alive with light and color. Dancers spun like flames, the air was alive with flutes and drums, and tables were heavy with food that seemed almost magical in its abundance. For a moment she stood at the edge, hidden in the shadows, drinking in the sight with aching wonder. Her heart felt both full and empty at once, for though she had no place among them, she was tasting joy with her eyes. She edged closer, careful not to draw attention. Every sound was sharper, every color brighter, as if the world itself had opened to her in this forbidden glimpse. The stepsister's laughter rang out across the square, sharp and cruel, and she saw her family boasting and laughing among the villagers. They looked radiant, yet hollow, for their joy was built on cruelty. The girl felt both envy and sorrow twist within her chest, but she did not turn away. She stayed, hidden but present, her eyes fixed on the glow of the fire and the unity it symbolized. Though she had been told she was unworthy, her soul clung to the sight of a joy she had always been denied. In that moment, beneath the torchlight and the sound of drums, she made a quiet vow, that no matter how much her household tried to erase her, she would not let her spirit be broken. The laughter was still rippling through the crowd when the girl looked down at her stained dress. The palm wine had soaked deep into the cloth, sticky and sharp with its sacred scent, but what startled everyone most was not the mess of fabric, but her skin beneath. Where the liquid had touched, a strange red glow shimmered, faint at first, then brightening as if embers had been pressed into her flesh. Yet the girl did not cry out. She did not flinch. She stood motionless, her hands trembling slightly at her sides, but her face calm, her dark eyes reflecting the dancing torches of the festival. At first, people thought it was a trick of firelight, the flicker of flames playing across her skin. But then the glow pulsed, steady and alive, as though the mark itself was breathing. The crowd leaned forward, their laughter dying into uneasy silence. Whispers curled through the air. "Is this witchcraft?" one voice muttered. "Or the spirit's hand?" asked another. The stepsister, who had been smirking at her little act of cruelty, suddenly froze. She had expected the girl to fall into shame, to run away as the crowd laughed at her humiliation. Instead, the mark on her skin seemed to have awakened something. Trying to keep her voice steady, the stepsister reached out to grab the stained cloth, pretending to help. But the moment her hands brushed the glowing patch, her body convulsed. She screamed. A searing cry split the night. She yanked her hands back, but the glow leapt from the girl's skin onto her palms, spreading like fire across her fingers and wrists. The sacred palm wine, meant for blessing and celebration, had turned against her, branding her with a pain too sharp to bear. She stumbled backward, clutching her arms, her face twisted in terror. The villagers gasped. Some tried to rush forward, but stopped as the stain kept crawling, glowing hotter, brighter, wrapping around her arms like fiery vines. "Make it stop," the stepsister shrieked, falling to her knees. She beat her hands against the ground, rolling in the dirt, but the stain only flared, as though the earth itself rejected her. The girl whose dress had been ruined simply stood in silence, her body still glowing faintly, untouched by pain. She felt no burn, no sting, only a strange warmth settling deep into her bones. It was as if the spirits themselves had wrapped her in unseen protection. She lifted her gaze to the villagers, and though she said nothing, her silence carried weight. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. The sacred palm wine was no ordinary drink. It was poured at the start of every feast to honor the ancestors, to bless the harvest, to keep harmony in the land. For it to spill and awaken such a sign was no small matter. One of the oldest women in the crowd whispered, "The ancestors have spoken. The wine has chosen her." But others hesitated, pointing to the writhing stepsister. "And what of her?" someone asked. "Why does it burn only her and not the other?" The elders' eyes narrowed. "Because guilt burns hotter than fire." The stepsister's screams filled the air, sharp and ragged, until her mother rushed forward, trying to pull her close. But even her mother recoiled, crying out as the glow scorched her touch. The two of them huddled, terrified, as the villagers pulled away in fear. No one dared touch the cursed stain. The girl looked down at her dress again. The mark still glowed faintly, but now it pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. A strange strength spread through her veins, steady and powerful. She felt taller somehow, heavier with meaning. For years she had been silenced, mocked, forced into corners. Tonight, before all eyes, something had shifted. The crowd began murmuring again. Some whispered that she was blessed, chosen by the spirits. Others, fearful, muttered that she carried dangerous magic. But no one could deny what they had seen. The humiliation planned for her had turned into judgment against the one who sought to harm her. The stepsister, trembling and pale, tried to crawl away, but her arms still glowed red, every movement racking her with pain. "She did this to me," she cried hoarsely, pointing at the girl. "She cursed me. She is the witch." But no one laughed anymore. Instead, they looked at her with doubt, with suspicion, with unease. For had they not all seen her spill the wine herself? Had she not plotted this? And was it not her who suffered now, while the girl stood unharmed? The festival music had stopped. The drums were silent, the dancers frozen. Only the crackle of fire and the stepsister's sobs filled the night. Slowly, the elder woman stepped forward, her walking stick tapping against the earth. She studied the glowing girl with piercing eyes. "Child," she said softly, "do you feel pain?" The girl shook her head. Her voice, steady for the first time in front of so many, carried clearly across the hushed square. "No. Only warmth." "And you?" The elder turned to the stepsister, who wailed as she clutched her arms. "Pain. Burning. Please help me," she begged. The elder closed her eyes. "Then the spirits have passed their judgment. The one who walks in truth is protected. The one who schemes in cruelty is punished." A murmur of agreement swept the villagers. Some bowed their heads. Others drew back, fearful of the power revealed. The girl felt their eyes on her, but she no longer lowered her gaze. She stood tall, her ruined dress still glowing faintly in the firelight, her shame transformed into a sign of strength. For the first time in her life she was not invisible. She was not mocked. She was seen. The courtyard, which had only moments ago been filled with mocking laughter, now carried a different sound entirely. It was the scream of the stepsister, raw and unrestrained, tearing through the air like a knife. Her arms flailed as the glowing red stain spread across her skin, burning deeper as if an invisible fire had latched onto her flesh. The other household members recoiled in horror, their faces pale, their cruel smirks melting into terror. And there, in the center of the chaos, stood the girl, the one they had always mocked, always burdened with endless chores, always dismissed as lesser. She should have felt vindicated. After all, was this not justice? Was this not the ancestor stepping in to defend her dignity, to punish the one who had humiliated her? But as she watched her stepsister writhing in agony, clutching at her arms and screaming for help, her heart did not swell with triumph. Instead, it cracked open with sorrow. The sight of her stepsister in such pain did not heal her wounds, it deepened them. She remembered every insult, every cruel chore, every time she had been belittled in front of strangers, and yet, she could not bring herself to rejoice. Slowly she fell to her knees, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. Her voice, soft and quivering at first, rose in prayer. "Ancestors," she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks, "I know you have seen my suffering. I know you have answered in justice. But I cannot bear to see her destroyed. She is cruel, yes, but she is still flesh and blood. Please, if there is mercy in your hearts, let her pain end." The courtyard went still. Even the wind seemed to hush, as if pausing to listen. The stepsister's screams faltered for a moment, then rose again, but weaker now, like the cries of someone who had already lost too much strength. The red stain on her arms pulsed like embers in a dying fire. The girl pressed her forehead to the ground, her tears darkening the dust beneath her. "Do not let her perish this way," she pleaded. "Do not let me become like her, finding joy in another's suffering. I forgive her, even if she will never forgive me. Spare her life, if not for her sake, then for mine." The elders, who had earlier declared that the wine was blessed and that no mortal should use it for cruelty, exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected the girl to claim victory, to let the punishment continue until the guilty one was consumed. Instead, she begged for mercy, for the very person who had wronged her most. Some of them shook their heads, whispering that she was too soft, that she did not understand justice. But others felt a shiver of awe. For compassion in the face of cruelty was rare, and perhaps that too was what the ancestors wished to see. The red glow on the stepsister's arms began to dim. The burning did not vanish entirely, but it slowed, as though the ancestors themselves had been touched by the girl's plea. The stain remained, a permanent scar etched into her skin, a reminder of what cruelty had awakened, but the fire's fury lessened. The stepsister collapsed to the ground, sobbing, her body trembling from exhaustion. The girl rose slowly, her knees dust-stained, her face streaked with tears. She did not approach her stepsister, for she knew that compassion did not mean trust. But she lifted her eyes toward the sky, where the faint shimmer of ancestral presence seemed to hover. "Thank you," she whispered, "for hearing me." The household looked at her differently now. Some with shame, for they had laughed alongside the stepsister and enjoyed her humiliation. Others with confusion, unable to understand why anyone would show kindness after such torment. But there were also those who looked at her with newfound respect, as though realizing for the first time that her strength did not lie in endurance alone. It lay in her heart's refusal to harden. The stepsister, still panting on the ground, glared at the girl through her tears. Hatred and shame burned in her eyes, but there was also fear. Fear of the scar that would never fade. Fear of the ancestors who had marked her. And perhaps, buried so deep it barely existed, a sliver of recognition that the girl she had despised had just saved her from destruction. That night, when the household dispersed and silence fell over the village, the girl remained awake. She sat outside, gazing at the stars. Her heart was heavy, but not with bitterness, rather with a strange mix of grief and relief. She had chosen compassion over vengeance, and though it had cost her the satisfaction of justice, it had brought her a different kind of peace. The ancestors, unseen but ever present, stirred in the night wind. They had witnessed her tears, her prayer, her choice. And though they did not speak, their silence carried weight. They had heard her, and they had answered. The scar on the stepsister's arms would remain forever, a burning reminder of cruelty turned back on itself. But the girl's response, her weeping, her prayer, her mercy, would also remain, echoing through the village as a story whispered from one generation to the next. Not of vengeance. Not of punishment. But of compassion so powerful that even spirits paused to listen. The days after the feast were heavy with silence in the stepmother's compound. What once had been a house filled with the confident chatter of a woman who believed she could bend fate to her will was now reduced to murmurs, gasps, and the occasional cry of the scarred stepsister. The wound left by the sacred palm wine did not heal as the family had hoped. Instead, it darkened, spreading into twisted shapes across her skin, like angry marks carved by invisible hands. Every time she walked through the village, children would stop their play and stare. Their parents quickly pulled them away, whispering warnings not to linger too long in the presence of someone marked by the ancestors. The stepmother, once proud and commanding, grew frantic. She called on healers from neighboring villages, offering them coins, yams, even chickens, anything to find a cure. The healers tried ointments, roots, and sacred chants, but the scars remained. Some remedies only deepened the burning, sending the girl into painful fits. The more the stepmother tried, the clearer it became to everyone watching. This was not a wound of the flesh but a judgment from beyond. Yet the stepmother refused to admit defeat. She wrapped her daughter in long, heavy cloths, hoping to hide the disfigurement. "The people must never see you like this," she hissed, adjusting the fabric roughly. But the heat of the sun and the burning of the mark often forced the girl to loosen the wraps, revealing glimpses of her shame. Neighbors who caught sight of it muttered prayers and hurried away. Word spread quickly as it always does. At the marketplace, women spoke in hushed voices while trading baskets of cassava. Men shaking gourds of palm wine leaned close to one another and shared the story again and again. "Did you hear? The ancestors have punished her. The spirits themselves struck her for cruelty. A girl who would spill sacred wine to humiliate another cannot walk freely under the sun." Soon the family's name became a warning. Mothers told their daughters, "Do not grow jealous or you will end like her." Fathers told their sons, "Beware of women who plot against innocence, for even the spirits will see." The shame that clung to the household was heavier than any curse. Once, the stepmother walked proudly to gatherings, her voice loud, her presence commanding. Now she avoided public events, claiming illness. When she did appear, no one greeted her with respect. People stepped aside, whispering, refusing to meet her eyes. It was not just her daughter who bore the scar, it was the entire family. The stepsister, who had once been admired for her beauty, now lived behind shadows. She could not bear the laughter of children who whispered about her. She stopped visiting the river with the other young women, stopped weaving at the market, stopped attending dances. Her world shrank to the walls of her home, where she sat in bitterness, clutching her scarred skin, hating both her victim and herself. The girl she had wronged, however, did not gloat. Whenever she passed the compound, she lowered her eyes and walked quickly, whispering prayers that her stepsister's suffering might ease. But others did not forget so easily. They reminded the family of their cruelty in subtle ways, turning away when they offered help, refusing to eat food they brought to gatherings, excluding them from decisions in the village. Even the stepmother's allies deserted her. Women who once joined her gossip stopped visiting. Men who once entertained her company at feasts avoided her gaze. She had become a symbol of disgrace, a woman who raised her children on envy and reaped the ancestors' anger. Nights in their compound became restless. The stepmother burned incense until the air grew thick, hoping to appease the spirits. She muttered prayers, called on shadowy figures, even tried forbidden charms whispered to her by travelers. Nothing worked. The scarred girl's cries echoed in the darkness, louder than drums, louder than the insects' hum, louder than her mother's desperate prayers. The final blow came during a council meeting. The elders had gathered to discuss preparations for the harvest festival. Every household had been called to contribute, but when the stepmother offered her share, an elder raised his hand. "Your offerings are not pure," he declared. "The ancestors have shown us your household stain. Until your family atones, you will bring nothing to the feast." The humiliation was complete. To be excluded from the harvest was to be cut off from the life of the community. The stepmother returned home in silence, her face pale, her steps heavy. For the first time she understood that her pride had turned to ashes. But worse than the shame was the lingering fear. Every whisper in the night, every rustle of wind, every flicker of the fire reminded her of the ancestors' judgment. She had tried to destroy another girl with cruelty, and now her own family bore the scars that no medicine could heal. And so the step-family lived under the shadow of their disgrace. Neighbors avoided them, whispers haunted them, and the ancestors' mark burned as a constant reminder that wickedness never hides from the eyes of the spirits. The nights that followed were filled with whispers. The villagers, still shaken by the step-family's downfall and the strange mercy of the girl, gathered often beneath the moon to discuss what they had seen. And whenever the girl stepped into the open square, her presence seemed to hush the air. The stain on her dress, once a mark of humiliation and cruelty, had transformed into something wondrous. Under the moon's glow, the blotches shimmered like liquid silver, flowing into patterns that resembled threads of light carefully woven by invisible hands. The people called her the wine-touched one. At first, the name was spoken with curiosity, then with awe. Children pointed when she walked by, tugging at their mother's wrappers to say, "Look! She carries the moon on her dress." Elders nodded slowly, recognizing that the spirits had chosen her suffering as a canvas for a lesson that would outlive every cruel whisper, every jealous act. What was once meant to disfigure had become her crown. The girl herself did not boast of this. When others came to stare, she lowered her eyes in humility. She still remembered the sting of her stepsister's hand, the scald of hot wine on her skin, the cries that followed when the punishment turned back on the cruel one. She did not want to be remembered for pain but for forgiveness. So when asked about her radiance, she answered softly, "It is not my doing. The ancestors turned my wound into a mirror, to remind us all." Each evening when the moon rose high, the light on her dress glimmered brighter. Women who struggled with barren wombs came to touch the hem, praying that her purity would intercede for them. Hunters, before setting out, asked her to bless their bows. Even travelers who had only heard rumors came to see the girl with their own eyes, eager to behold the spirit's mark. She never turned them away. Instead, she offered prayers for each one, her voice as calm as water poured over warm stones. But this favor was not without consequence. Her stepmother grew restless with shame. The more the village admired the girl, the more the family shrank into the shadows of their hut. Once they had walked with pride, dressed in beads and bold cloth. Now, no matter what finery they wore, people saw only the scars of wickedness that clung to them like dust. The girl, however, wore the same simple dress, her hair neatly plaited, her face glowing with peace, and yet she outshone them all. One night, the elders gathered in the great hut and summoned her. They sat in a circle, the firelight dancing on their foreheads, the air heavy with the scent of cola and palm oil. "Child," the eldest among them said, "your suffering has been turned into blessing, and your shame into radiance. Do you know why the spirits have chosen you for this?" She bowed before them. "I do not know," she whispered. "Perhaps because I prayed for mercy, not vengeance." The elders nodded. "Yes," said one, "for those who forgive carry more power than those who strike back. The spirits saw your heart, and they made you a living sign so that all of us may learn. You are to remind us that wine, blood, water, all sacred gifts must never be spilled with malice. And that when the innocent endure cruelty, the spirits themselves will rise to clothe them in light." From that night on, it became tradition for the village to honor her radiance. At every full moon they gathered in the open square. The girl would walk slowly across the earth, and when the light caught her dress, children gasped, women clapped softly and men bowed their heads. The patterns that appeared never stayed the same. Sometimes swirls like rivers, sometimes strands like hair, sometimes flames that curled like whispers of fire. To the people, it was proof that the ancestors were alive among them. Her story spread beyond the village. Travelers carried the tale to neighboring lands, and soon she was welcomed into festivals as a guest of honor. Strangers offered her gifts, but she accepted only those she could share: goats, baskets of millet, gourds of milk. "Nothing I own is mine alone," she would say, "for I was lifted up not by my hands but by the mercy of the spirits." And yet, even with her rising fame, she did not abandon her duties. Each morning she fetched water, swept the compound, and sang with the other girls. She never raised her voice against her stepfamily, nor did she seek to shame them further. When they passed by with downcast faces, she greeted them kindly as though the past had been washed away. This, more than the glowing dress, struck the villagers' hearts. It was easy to marvel at light, it was harder to live in constant forgiveness. As the seasons turned, the girl's name became part of the village's songs. Children at play chanted. She bore the wine yet carried no stain. She bore the pain yet forgave again. Moonlight weaves her sorrow bright. The wine touched one walks in light. Her radiance became a compass, guiding the village back to balance whenever envy or cruelty threatened to rise again. Parents told their children, "Do not mock, do not strike, for what you do in secret may one day shine in the open, as her dress shines beneath the moon." And so, the girl who had once been the target of scorn became a living legend, her every step casting threads of light across the earth. She no longer feared the shadows of her past, for the very mark of her suffering had been transformed into her crown. The spirits had not only answered her prayers, they had etched her compassion into the memory of the people, so that even long after she was gone, the story of the wine-touched one would continue to shimmer across the generations, like silver thread woven into the fabric of time. The story of the girl did not end with her lifetime. The red stain upon her dress, once meant to mark her in humiliation, became the seed of a lesson that outlived kings, seasons, and even the soil of the village. The elders, the griots, and the women who carried the memory of their mothers all began to weave the story into lullabies, work songs, and festival chants. And so, the girl who was mocked for her burden became the foundation of a teaching. Never twist blessings into weapons, never turn sustenance into scorn. Mothers told their daughters, when you cook, cook with clean hands and a clean heart. When you pour wine, pour it with reverence, for what you place in another's mouth is a reflection of what lives in your spirit. Fathers told their sons, do not shame those who serve you, for one day your hands may tremble, and you will need someone to feed you. The way you treat the weak will echo in the strength of your own children. The stain itself was preserved as a relic. The girl, now honored as the wine-touched one, kept her dress carefully folded away. She never tried to wash it, never tried to hide the mark, for she understood that what once shamed her had become her crown. When her own children were born, she showed it to them and said, see this. It was meant to wound me, but it carried the truth of the spirits. Remember, children, no matter what the world throws upon you, if you stand with patience, your scars may one day become the light by which others walk. Her household, once cruel and mocking, softened with time. The men and women who had laughed at her grew old, and as their laughter weakened into coughs, they found themselves needing her hands. The very girl they scorned fed them, washed them, and carried water to soothe their thirst. Some wept in shame, saying, we wronged you. And she only replied, it was not me who punished you. It was the spirits who turned wine into flame. I only lived through it. Her mercy became the sharpest lesson of all. For the people realized, the stain had not only burned the cruel, it had also been preserved by her refusal to let bitterness consume her. She had every right to curse them, yet she did not. And so, her restraint gave the story its true power. The griots sang, the girl's stain burned like fire, but her heart remained cool like water. Fire and water both lived in her, and so the spirits crowned her. Generations later, when children quarreled at the hearth and threatened to waste food to make one another cry, mothers would sternly clap their hands and say, do you not remember the wine-touched one? Blessings are not for spite. The spirits are watching. And the children, fearful of the tale, would gather again in peace. At weddings, before the first sip of palm wine was drunk, elders poured a libation onto the ground and declared, this earth received the fire of the stain. Let it receive our thanks before our lips taste joy. At funerals, a gourd of wine was left by the grave so that the ancestors might drink first. The stain had changed not just one girl's life, but the rituals of the entire community. Even as the centuries shifted and the village grew into a town, and the town into a place where traders from far lands brought salt, cloth, and stories of other gods, the people did not forget the wine-touched one. Her name became a proverb. When a person forgave an insult, the elders would nod and say, ah, that one carries the stain well. When someone tried to mock another with food or drink, the crowd would cry out, beware! Have you not heard of the wine-touched one? Songs grew around her story. One was sung by women pounding grain. Do not throw wine like fire, child. Do not pour blessing like poison. For the earth is listening, and the spirits are watching. Her descendants were proud to be known as the children of the wine-touched one. They carried themselves with dignity, reminding others that patience was not weakness but strength. And so the girl's legacy became not just a memory, but a lineage of wisdom. In time, travelers from other regions heard the tale. Some laughed, saying, how can a stain on a dress burn the wicked? But when they stayed in the village and watched how the people honored their food, drink, and blessings, they grew quiet. For they saw that this tale was not about fabric and wine, it was about respect, humility, and the power of unseen forces that guard what is sacred. And so the story lived on, reshaped in each telling, but always with the same heart. Never twist what nourishes into what destroys. Never humiliate with what should heal. The stain remained the eternal reminder. Long after the girl herself returned to the ancestors, her story walked on in the voices of griots, in the rhythm of drums, and in the wisdom of mothers teaching their children. The stain burned the cruel once, but its glow lit the hearts of many for generations. The laughter was loud, ringing through the courtyard like a cruel bell. The eldest stepsister had tipped the clay gourd with a flourish, pouring wine over the girl's new dress. The red liquid spread quickly across the fabric, dripping to the dusty floor. Her other stepsisters clapped their hands and laughed as though they had witnessed something clever, something amusing. The girl stood still. She could feel the wine soaking through, sticky and cold against her skin. Yet she did not cry. She did not raise her hands to wipe the stain. She only lowered her head, letting her long braids fall forward, covering part of her face. Inside, however, her heart throbbed with the humiliation. That dress was her only good garment, meant to be worn when visitors came to the village. Now it was ruined, or so they thought. The moon rose above the thatched roofs, pale and round, bathing the courtyard in silver. Its light fell upon her, and something strange began to happen. The stain shimmered, glowing faintly as though fire hid beneath the cloth. The stepsisters, still laughing, slowed as their eyes caught the flicker. The girl noticed the warmth spreading, not on her body but on the fabric itself, which pulsed with a red glow. "Look!" gasped one of the younger stepsisters, pointing. The eldest frowned. "It is only the wine reflecting the moon." But her voice trembled. She reached out, grabbing the cloth to show that it was nothing unusual. The moment her fingers touched the wine-soaked fabric, she let out a sharp cry. Her hand burned as if she had grasped hot coals. The others gasped, their laughter instantly silenced. The girl stumbled back in shock, for she had felt nothing, no heat, no pain. The eldest stepsister, however, clutched her hand, wailing. Blisters began to rise on her skin, red and angry. "What is happening?" cried the mother, rushing from inside the house, alarmed by the noise. She seized her daughter's arm, only to recoil. The stain had spread from the girl's dress onto the eldest stepsister's hand, winding like a serpent of fire, wrapping around her wrist. "It burns! It burns!" the stepsister screamed, collapsing to the ground. She rolled in the dust, trying to shake it off, but the glowing mark spread up her arm, searing her skin. The villagers, hearing the cries, gathered outside the compound. They peered through the gate, whispering, "What has happened? Is it witchcraft? The wine burns." The girl stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. She felt the eyes of everyone on her, their fear, their suspicion, their awe. She wanted to say she had done nothing, that she had only stood there, helpless. But no words left her lips. The mother turned on her, her eyes wild with terror and anger. "What have you done to her?" "Nothing," the girl whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "I did nothing." But the glowing mark did not fade. It crept higher on the stepsister's arm, and her screams grew louder, echoing through the night. The mother, desperate, ordered water to be brought. Pots were overturned, water splashed onto the wound, but it hissed like rain striking hot stones. Steam rose and the smell of burning flesh filled the air. The villagers muttered among themselves. Some crossed their arms over their chests, invoking protection. Others murmured, "The spirits are angry. This is punishment." The girl felt her knees weaken. She did not want this, she had not wished harm. Yet she could not deny what her eyes saw. The wine stain, glowing like fire, was no longer hers. It belonged to her stepsister now, searing her for the cruelty she had inflicted. The younger stepsisters cowered, pressing themselves against the wall, their faces pale with fear. The mother shouted curses at the girl, calling her a witch, a bringer of misfortune. But none dared touch her. The villagers too kept their distance. It was clear to them that whatever power had been awakened was beyond ordinary hands. Finally the eldest stepsister collapsed, exhausted, her screams fading into sobs. The burning stain stopped at her shoulder, leaving her arm swollen, blistered and scarred. The glow dimmed and the night seemed to sigh in relief. Silence fell. Only the sound of her ragged breathing filled the air. The villagers looked at the girl differently now. Some with fear, others with reverence. One old woman spoke, her voice low but firm, "The spirits have spoken. They protect this child. Whoever mocks her mocks the ancestors themselves." The mother glared at the old woman but said nothing. She pulled her injured daughter inside, barking at the others to follow. The courtyard emptied, leaving the girl standing alone in the moonlight, her dress still stained red, but now shimmering faintly as though woven with threads of flame. The days that followed were heavy with whispers. In the market, women spoke of the burning stain, telling the story in hushed tones. Some said the girl was cursed. Others said she was chosen. The truth lay in between, though none could say for sure. The eldest stepsister could no longer use her arm without pain. She hid her scars under cloth, bitter and silent. She avoided the girl, glaring whenever their eyes met. The mother too grew wary, no longer daring to strike the girl or heap insults upon her. Instead, she kept her distance, muttering under her breath, blaming the ancestors for turning against her household. But the girl herself felt no triumph. She looked at her dress every night, at the glowing stain that refused to fade. She traced it with her fingers, feeling only the smooth fabric, but when the moonlight touched it, it gleamed like fresh blood. She wondered why the spirits had chosen her. She wondered if this power was truly protection, or a burden she could not yet understand. One evening, as she fetched water from the river, an elder approached her. His back was bent with age, his eyes clouded but sharp. He studied her silently for a long time. "You carry a mark," he said at last. "Not of shame but of justice. Do not fear it." The girl bowed her head. "I did not ask for it. I do not want to hurt anyone." "The spirits choose where to place their fire," the elder replied. "It burns only the guilty. Remember this." His words gave her little comfort, yet she held them close. Over time, the villagers began to treat her differently. They no longer called her weak or useless. Some brought her gifts of food or cloth, saying it was in thanks, or perhaps in fear. Children followed her at a distance, whispering, pointing at the glowing threads that now seemed permanent on her dress. And though the girl remained quiet, carrying her chores as before, something within her had changed. She no longer bent as low under her burdens. She no longer kept her eyes always to the ground. For she knew now that she was not as powerless as they had made her believe. Still, the stain glowed, waiting, a fire hidden in the cloth, ready to judge again if cruelty dared to rise against her.